Hello, welcome to Micah Manages It, the Micah Makes It podcast. In this podcast, we will be discussing questions you may have on the Christian faith and also questions you may have about my channel and interviewing cast from some videos. We hope you enjoy it, and let's get into this episode. Hey guys, welcome back to Micah Manages It, the Micah Makes It podcast. Today, me and Cameron, say hi.
Hi.
Me and Cameron are going to be proving the Bible correct. Not correct, proving that it actually happened and that everything it says is true. So, Cameron, why don't you explain?
Yeah, this is mainly for Christians. This is not for non-believers because the Israelites, as they came out of Egypt, they had seen many signs and miracles like the great pillar of fire and clouds and the snakes, and they've seen many miracles, and yet they still didn't believe, and they still turned to idols. And so God has hardened the hearts of the unbelievers that even if God was right in front of them, they still wouldn't believe. So this is mainly for Christians who already believe the Bible, just so that they can see more proof.
But it can be used for a non-believer who is on the doubt or is doubting and wondering whether Christianity is real. All right, so let's go ahead and start with the disclaimer. Me and Cameron obviously are not professionals at this. We have not spent our entire lives studying this. We have not gotten a degree in this, but we do have multiple resources of people who have done that. One good place to go is gotquestions.org. They have an entire article on why Christianity is real. And that was actually, I went through a period of really serious doubting, and that is actually what healed it pretty much, the article. So I'll put a link in the description. Also, Case for Christ and Case for Creation by Lee Strobel are good books that you can read. They do make he does make a kids version too, so. Cameron, any other disclaimers you might want to add?
Yes. Again, we are not pastors or anything. There's someone else who will always explain what we're trying to explain better than we can. But all we're doing is we're just saying what people have already said, which is the point of the gospel. Someone tells someone else, who tells someone else, who tells someone else, and it spreads across the whole world. However, you don't want it to turn into like the telephone game, where if you have enough people, cat could become dog. So you always want to go back to the Bible, the source, to make sure that what you're saying matches up.
Did we have another disclaimer? I feel like there was another
one. Oh yes, before you tell anyone about things of the Bible or Christ, you should always pray before it. Even if you're just discussing it amongst two friends, always pray for guidance.
Which is what me and Cameron did before starting this. Alright, so we will get into it starting with creation. I'm going to grab my book. I actually have it up here. It's the kids version, but it's... So I have both books. I have Case for Creation for Kids, or Case for a Creator for Kids, and Case for Christ. Starting with Case for Creator, he talks so much about the build of the human body and how none of this could have been an accident. Proof. This is just kind of... I don't think it's a coincidence. I think God knew what he was doing, but there's a... hold on, let me search it up. There is a molecule that holds the whole body together. It's called laminin, and just kind of funny. The shape of it is actually a cross, so that's just cool. Another thing is the coding. So everyone knows what coding is. You type in a bunch of different letters and numbers, and you code something. So our DNA has a code of, I'm not sure how many in each molecule of DNA, but total there are like 34 billion code letters, which maybe that's in one molecule. I'm not sure, but what I do remember is it would take, I think, 33 to 34 years to recite every single letter of the DNA code, and that'd be going day and night without taking a break. So that's how much coding there is in your body, and that's why it cannot be an accident.
And there's this computer scientist who took a look at the human DNA, and he said that it very much looks like computer code, just far more complex than anything we've come up with. Also, the creator of the evolution theory, Charles Darwin, he admitted that his theory would be wrong if what we knew about cells and cell structures were wrong, which we found out later. For a cell to function, it needs all 250 of its parts to work. So in order for new DNA to be added to a being, for it to change kinds, it would have to match up with all 250. And that is like winning the lottery slots 250 times in a row, which is nearly impossible. If that were true, it would be a bigger miracle than just someone creating the world.
Okay, so sorry if we sound a little hoarse. We just got back from a camp. But the next thing is the flood. And I'm going to let Cameron talk about that while I grab a computer charger.
All right. There's lots and lots of evidence for the flood. A lot that scientists have used to try to prove their theories, but really it proves the flood. One example is deserts. Scientists have said that deserts used to be seas, and that's why there's always a lot of sand, and they found fish structures and skeletons in the deserts. And they have their own theories as to why this is, but the best theory that they've come up with is that if the world was covered with water, it would have made all these deserts seas. And so that proves the flood, because all these deserts around the world, even in the middle of countries, had to be seas. And the only real way that they could have been seas is because of the flood. Also, the Bible in Genesis, if we go to Genesis, give me a second, to where it talks about the flood, it says that on that day, all the foundations of the great deep were broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened. This means that water not only came from the sky, but it came from the depths of the earth. And such examples are the Grand Canyon, which is, if you look at it, it looks like it was eroded with water from the bottom up, which is a great example. And there was this great event about 100 years ago called Mount St. Helens, where it erupted. And very quickly, canyons were formed, and all these things that scientists said would take thousands of years to happen happened in a few days. Canyons were formed out of rock. All these tree parts fell to the bottom of the sea, and many other things like that, which proves that these things can happen very quickly. Also, another example of the flood is fossils. Scientists studying fossils have admitted that the only way that fossils could be formed, as far as they have found, is if rock layers were put over animals very quickly. Because if it was slow, then the fossils would have decayed. Another example is we found fossils and there was still blood and tissue in the fossils, which would have been eaten up and decayed unless it was very quickly covered up. There was also mosquitoes that had blood still in them, and also carbon-14, which scientists use to tell how old something is. After studying it, it was found that it decays after about 1,000 years. So the carbon-14 that they use to say that something is like billions of years old is unreliable because it would have decayed 1,000 years ago plus. Trying to think if there's any other evidence that we found for the flood. Do you have anything like that?
So one thing they found is like the continents shift apart. They shifted apart, and the only proof they can find for that is, or the only reasonable idea is a flood, a worldwide flood. And there's no other like recorded event in history that could have done that. So more proof that the flood exists, and of course, no evolutionist is going to say that because they don't want to admit that that they're wrong. So that's more proof for the flood. And next, we're going to get to proof of the Exodus.
I got one more thing.
Oh, wait. After Cameron goes.
I forgot. So, our current interim pastor, student pastor, Wes, his friends went on a hike to the top of this mountain. I forget what mountain it was. And they found these rocks, and they brought them back. And in the rocks were fossils of sea creatures. And you can just find them at the top of this mountain. And scientists are bewildered how all these fossils got to the top of this very tall mountain, because the sea level, in order for it to happen, the sea level would have had to have rose drastically.
It's just more proof. The proof goes on, but you're never gonna search up. If you search up which religion has the most proof, no one's going to come out flat out and say Christianity, because they know it's right, but they don't want to admit that it's right. So they're going to say something like Buddhism or Hinduism or Islam or Muslim, or those are the same thing.
Yes.
Islam or Mormon. They're going to say that because they know that Christianity is wrong. So if you search up proof for Christianity, Lee Strobel, the guy who wrote Case for Christ, he was an atheist, and he basically hated Christianity, and he wanted to prove to everybody that Christianity was false and that Christ never lived or died. There's multiple evidence that he lived, but he wanted to prove that he was not God. And when he went to look at the evidence, all he could find was proof for Christianity, and he ended up becoming a Christian because of that. Mm-hmm. So if you don't have the Case for Christ, I'm sure you can find it free online. It's a very good book. So I recommend that if you're doubting, and Case for Creator if you're doubting creation. So you don't have anything else to add about flood?
No, but even if I think of it, we can always come back.
Yeah. So next, proof of the Exodus happening and the splitting of the Red Sea and Moses and all the Israelites leaving Egypt. So they have found. You can hear how hoarse my voice is. They have found.
Well, first off, we should talk about like where this occurred, and there is this specific strait in the Red Sea, which is very thin, and it connects Egypt to what was Canaan or modern day Palestine, and that's where we think it found, because if you look at the rocks on the bottom of the sea, the rocks seem to be like separated almost as if it were blown away in a path. Also, the path that we look at kind of dips down to like about 900 feet below the sea level and then comes back up, which is a very easy trip for like caravans and carriages and stuff.
I was going to say, only proof that I've seen is coral structures that look like chariots, because Egypt or Pharaoh's army got drowned by God. But Cameron apparently has found more proof. So What do you want to say on that?
So they looked on this path and they found these chariot wheels separated from these chariots that were covered in coral, which scientists are just like, oh, it's all these coral structures that just look like chariot wheels. But they stripped the coral off and they found gold on it. And when they tried to touch the gold, since it was so old, it just kind of shattered. But they took pictures of it, these divers, and one interesting thing is that they never found a chariot with wheels attached. They always found them separate. And this is because in Exodus it says that God took the wheels off the chariots in order to slow down the Egyptians. And also they took pictures of these wheels and they looked at the design of the wheels, and they saw that the design was only from one dynasty, and that one dynasty was the dynasty that was in place during the time of the enslavement of the Israelites.
One other thing I was going to say is, what was I about to say? Something about the Red Sea. They have found that stuff, and people are just like, oh, it's just coral structures, but it's not. They found the gold. Oh, my question was, where'd you hear that? Like, what website was that on?
There was this scientist. I just found it on YouTube. I think it was on this dude called Pastor Daniel's channel. There was one video about this scientist proving a lot of different things, including the Red Sea crossing. And he talked about the divers. And another thing that they found was on either side of the Red Sea, they found these two pillars. One of them was kind of eroded by rock or water, but another one, there was like text that was barely intelligible. And they read it, and it said something along the lines of, this pillar was erected by King Solomon in commemorance of the Red Sea crossing. And they found two of these. And also, they found Mount Sinai in, I forget where it was. I think it was like Syria or something. In fact, the Bible says that it was in Syria, or whatever country it was. I don't think it was Syria, something like that. And what they found at this mountain was like a carving of a calf. And also, there's this rock that has perplexed scientists because the rock has been split completely down the middle, naturally. And scientists have no idea why this happened. And they've come up with all these theories as to why this happened. Some people say aliens, but the most accepted theory is that it was just some incredible coincidence. But there's actually a biblical explanation. We looked for a biblical explanation, but once we realized where this rock was, it became clear. In Exodus 17, it talks about water from the rock. And what it says is that the people thirsted for water, and so Moses called out to God, and God said, I will stand before you there on the rock in Horeb, and you shall strike the rock, and water will come out of it so that the people may drink. And so he struck this rock, and so much water came out that it fed all these thousands of people and their camels. And if you look at the rock, the one that was split in half, it looks eroded by water. And it looks like, in fact, water came out of the crack and eroded some of the rock away and just like flowed down. Also, the ground around the rock is smooth. Like there were these guys that drove their truck over there. It was the same guys that looked at the Red Sea crossing. And their truck was like on a very bumpy terrain because of all these rocks. But once they got to the place of the split rock, it was a smooth ride, almost as if water eroded the rock and flattened it out.
Is it called like Al Nazla? Because
I forget what the rock is called current day, but you can look up pictures of like split rock.
But so next we're going to go on to
there's one more proof that I forgot to mention. There's this town, and it says somewhere in Exodus that God sent like rain, like flaming sulfur down to destroy this town. I forget what town it was. Maybe it was Sodom and Gomorrah. Anyway, it said that he sent down flaming sulfur. And if you go to this place, you can find all these like hundreds of balls that what you do is you scrape off the white layer and you can find yellow pure sulfur. And so what we've discovered is that the sulfur was flaming, and once it hit the ground, the melted sulfur covered up the flaming sulfur and cut off its oxygen. And you can just look up pictures of like these round sulfuric rocks. And this one guy that I watched, he had one of the rocks and he showed people what it was. And so this is evidence of the destruction of, I think, Sodom and Gomorrah.
Okay, so is that everything for Red Sea and Moses? Is that all right? So now we're going to go on to proof of Jesus, and that he lived and that he is who he said he was. So first thing, there have been multiple writers who lived at the same time of Jesus and lived right after Jesus was ascended to heaven, and they wrote about Jesus in their writings. These weren't disciples, these weren't followers of God. They wrote about them like old philosophers wrote about him in their writings, which is proof. Another thing is about 50 years ago, it would have been so much harder to prove Christianity. And then they found the Dead Sea Scrolls, and that was just so much overwhelming proof of them. If you don't know what the Dead Sea Scrolls are, I think it was a couple kids that were playing over in like the Middle East. That's where they lived, and they fell in a like cave, and they found these pots or like vases, I think. And I think one of them accidentally broke it or like broke it on purpose. And inside were these scrolls, and they were like historic, accurate writings of like I think the Gospels and maybe some New Testament letters. I'm not sure, but it was one of those things. And so they what were the scrolls in the Dead Sea Scrolls? Were they like New Testament writings?
Yes, they were ancient manuscripts, and they found over not just the Red Sea Scrolls. They found 1,300 plus ancient manuscripts, and that really proves Christianity true, because if you look at it and then you look at current day Bibles, they match up. And also Islam, Muhammad, he was this guy who worshipped many gods, including the moon god Allah. And one night he started having all these seizures, and he started seeing visions in these dreams, and he couldn't tell if they were from angels or demons. But his wife, one of his wives, said that it must be from angels. And so he wrote all these visions down on bone fragments and stuff. And eventually all these different versions started getting written down. And then one day the leaders of Islam got all the original manuscripts together and burned them and wrote their own version. So we don't even know if the current version of the Quran is true. And I read the Quran, and one interesting thing is at the beginning, it like is kind of like, oh yeah, the Bible's true, and Christians are your brothers, and Jews are your brothers. But then later, like in the second half, it basically says, ignore the first half. And it like contradicts itself. And you don't have any original manuscripts from Islam, because they were all burned by the Islamic leaders. But we have like 1,300 plus ancient manuscripts of the Bible, and Christianity is the only religion that has that many ancient manuscripts. All other religions either have none or like maybe like 25.
And one thing, everyone knows that Aristotle and everyone knows that Aristotle lived, and they only have 59 original manuscripts of his, and they have like 2,000 or 2,000 or more of the Bible. So more proof. Another thing is multiple people think the disciples were hallucinating or the disciples were lying, or this is mentioned in the Bible. People think the disciples came and stole Jesus's body, took it out of the grave, and told everyone, he rose,
Sorry.
he rose, he's risen.
Real quick, I said that there were 1,300 plus ancient manuscripts. That's actually wrong. There's 5,800 ancient manuscripts. My bad,
Okay,
my bad.
I was going to say something like 6,000, so even more proof. But it's said in the Bible, let's see, it's somewhere in Matthew, I believe. It's like Matthew 27, Matthew 28. Yes, Matthew 28. Matthew 28, 11 through 15. While they were going, this is while they were walking with Jesus. The disciples were walking with Jesus. So while they were going, behold, some of the guard went into the city and told the chief priests all that had taken place. So the chief priests knew that Jesus had risen and that he was who he said he was. And instead of trying to repent and trying to receive favor or receive forgiveness, they spread even more lies. So it says, when they had assembled with the elders and taken counsel, they gave a sufficient sum of money to the soldier and said, tell people, his disciples came by night and stole him away while we were asleep. And it says, so they took money, did as they were directed, and that story is still spread to this day.
All right, so currently the two most common theories about Jesus to prove that Jesus didn't rise from the dead are A, that the disciples were hallucinating, and B, that the disciples were lying. And proof that they weren't hallucinating, there was this dude who just assumed that that was the only reasonable explanation. But then he went to this dude who was an expert on hallucinations. And he said, oh yeah, so it's just fact that the disciples hallucinated. And he said, no, in fact, it was impossible that all the disciples hallucinated, because a hallucination does not spread like a disease. A hallucination is between one person. And so if 500 people had a hallucination of Jesus coming back at the same time, it would have been a bigger miracle than just if he rose from the dead. Also, in order for a hallucination to happen, you would have to have a personal relationship with the person. And Paul, he never had a personal relationship with Jesus. So how could he have hallucinated about Jesus and turned to Christianity and started telling everybody that Christianity was true if he never had in fact, he hated Christians. And how could he have turned and had a hallucination of Jesus if he did not have a personal relationship with Jesus? Also, in order for them to have hallucinations, the body would have still been there. And this was another thing that the hallucination expert was talking about. If they just hallucinated about Jesus, the body would have still been in the tomb. And oops, look, no body in the tomb. So how could they have? So they couldn't have had hallucinations. And then the second thing, a most common theory, is that they were all liars and they just lied. But they could not have been liars because let me think of how to say this. They couldn't have been liars because you would not die for a lie. If they lied, then that means they would have lied for 40 years or something like that. And then they would have died for this lie. And what they did is they did an experiment. They got these 3 smartest guys on the planet and told them to keep this lie. And they went a year and then they cracked and told everybody that it was a lie. So these 3 smartest guys, they could not even keep a lie for a year. So how could the disciples have kept a lie for 40 years and then died for this lie?
And the fact that they were not smart people, they were probably the lowest class of people. They were poor. They were like fishermen, which was basically like shepherds. And so the fact that they could have kept a lie better than three smart men is impossible. Again, it'd be easier for them to have just told the truth. It's more miraculous that it's more miraculous that they actually kept alive for 40 years than if Jesus had come back and risen from the dead. Um, if you don't know this, almost all the disciples were tortured and killed. James was beheaded, so he got off kind of easy. He was just killed like that. I think one of them was flayed or like skinned alive. I think Bartholomew was. John was the only disciple who was not martyred. He just died of old age. John wrote,
but he was exiled from the mainland.
Yeah, he was put in a prison on a small island, and that's where he had his revelation of Jesus Christ. And so after that, after him, no more books were written because it was done with the God had completed everything he needed to say. But again, proof that no one could have kept alive for 40 years and suffered absolute torture. If it was me keeping a lie, they'd be like, "You're gonna die now if you don't stop." I'll be like, "Okay, jeez, it was a lie. I was just kidding." But they kept it for 40 years, and no, I'm acting like it was a lie. The fact that
it couldn't have.
They couldn't have kept. Yeah, they couldn't have kept alive for 40 years and died of torture, and just been okay with that. So.
Also, one other thing is there are two theories about Jesus himself. One is that Jesus was a liar, and one is that Jesus was a fool. And the thing about Jesus being a liar, if he was a liar, he performed miracles, and he rose from the dead, which we just proved. So if he was a liar, and he lied about being the Son of God, that means that he would have had to be a demon. And if he was a demon, why would he cast out demons, and why would he tell the truth about what God wants and then act against demons and act without sin? Yeah. And I read something about this a little while ago. I don't remember it very clearly. I'm not sure if Micah has anything on this. How Jesus couldn't be a liar.
Yeah, and I was gonna say probably one of the dumbest ideas I have ever heard. At this point, it's just believe that he rose from the grave. It is harder to believe this statement that I'm about to say than to believe he rose from the dead. People think on the cross, Jesus passed out. He didn't die from probably losing like 90% of his blood. He just passed out.
Yes.
Weak as ever, probably one of the weakest human beings ever. He was put in the grave. He woke up from his little faint on Sunday morning, rolled that probably 500 to 1,000 pound stone away by himself. Walked around like he was A-okay after being crucified, beaten, whipped,
yes.
losing so much blood. He just walked around like he was fine and went back up that.
And they stuffed his body full of these preservation oils and like stuff that they do to like prepare the body for entombment. And that was really heavy. And so he just like woke up after losing like 90% of his blood. Like just carried all this oils that were stuffed into his body around, rolled this like 5-ton stone away, defeated 2 of these Roman guards with his bare hands, and like scared them half to death, and then just like walked around and told everybody who he was, and then he just like magically flew into heaven on his own.
Well, I think that is all we've got. If you would like this video, if you would like more, I'm sure we could find more proof of other biblical events.
Yes, and I don't think we really did a good job on proving that God wasn't a liar or wasn't a fool, but we can always like kind of research on that and come back and do it again, because there's lots of proof that there's like proof that people have written articles about that he couldn't have been a liar and he couldn't have been a fool. I just really forgot about what was said. So we can get back to you guys on that. Anything else you had to say, Michael?
Not really. Just use this information wisely. You use it for correction and reproof, but also use it for caution. Like
also fact track us on everything we said, because we're just quoting from other people, and I don't know if everything we said. Just make sure that everything we said has been backed up by other people, and if not, let us know.
Hopefully, everything we did say was backed up. So that's going to be it for this podcast. This was a really long one. That's going to be it. Thank you for tuning in. If you did, make sure to tell people about this. People who are maybe on the verge, or Christians who are doubting, or people that need to know that demons and Satan are real, and they need to know
the Bible itself is true on its own, and it doesn't need any proof. It's just cool to see proof from like archaeological sites for the Bible. Oh, one more thing before we go. I want to just mention this. King David never existed, at least archaeologically, until like, I don't know, 150 years ago or something, where they found this little tablet where the king of Syria or something, I forget, he wrote down, and he was bragging, and he said that they have defeated the house of David. And that was proof that David existed. And that was like, that's because like before that, we're like, oh, we have no archaeological proof that David existed until they found, and it wasn't even like in the promised land, in the Holy Land. There's just some king who was bragging and said they defeated the house of David.
Well, that's going to be it. Thank you, Cameron, for all that. Cameron basically carried this episode. Make sure to like, subscribe, and tell people. It's going to be it for this. We will see you guys, or at least I will see you guys. Hopefully Cameron can come back for the next one. See you in the next one. Thanks.
I'll try to come back for the proving that Jesus wasn't a fool or a liar.
Okay. Bye. Hey guys, thanks for listening to this episode of Micah Manages It, the Micah Makes It podcast. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. We'll see you in the next one. Thank you.